Hello, and welcome back to Forgotten Ties, where we dive deep into the kind of stories that blur the line between fate and downright nightmare. Today, we're peeling back the layers on a coincidence so jarring, so emotionally brutal, that it makes you question everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you. We're talking about Evelyn, a woman in her late 30s, sharp, pragmatic, with hair the color of midnight and eyes that usually hold a weary skepticism, who was about to have her entire foundation shaken by an old, yellowed piece of lace. Evelyn's relationship with her mother, Clara, was, to put it mildly, an archaeological dig. Clara had passed away 6 months prior, leaving behind a sterile, organized life in a small, meticulously kept condo in suburban Ohio. Everything was in its place, perfectly labeled, but somehow empty. Evelyn had spent the better part of those 6 months dismantling the physical remnants of Clara's life, searching for a single warm memory, a scrap of evidence that her mother was more than the cool, distant figure who raised her. It was a search for connection she hadn't found in life. Clara's wedding dress, the one she wore when she married Evelyn's father, a man who evaporated from their lives when Evelyn was barely 5, had always been a symbol of that distance. Clara had mentioned it perhaps twice, once to say it was packed away properly, and once to dismiss any sentimental notion of Evelyn ever wearing it. It was a ghost of a garment, an absence that spoke volumes. When Evelyn finally went looking for it among the cedar chests and attic boxes, it wasn't there. Only an empty, acid-free box labeled, simply dress. Evelyn had dismissed it as a final, frustrating enigma from a woman who specialized in them. But then, the twist. The kind of cruel, cosmic joke that only happens in the deepest shadows of a thriller. Evelyn wasn't a regular thrift shopper. Her aesthetic leaned more toward minimalist than vintage. She was only at the Golden Hanger, a massive, labyrinthine charity shop famous for its donated bridal section, to buy some cheap sheets for a painting project. The bridal section was tucked away in the back, a silent, sprawling sea of white tulle and satin, draped on sad, headless mannequins. It's a place steeped in the hopes and, often, the shattered dreams of strangers. Evelyn was about to walk past, but a sudden, almost magnetic pull drew her toward a specific rack. Not the newest, most pristine dresses, but the ones shoved toward the end, the forgotten few. And there it was. Not screaming for attention, but rather, whispering in a familiar silence. A gown of simple, almost austere silk with long, fitted sleeves and a high neckline, a style definitely late 80s, early 90s. The color wasn't a blinding white, but the soft, pale cream of age. But it wasn't the style that stopped Evelyn's breath, it was the lace. Clara had been an exceptional seamstress. She had an almost neurotic attention to detail, especially when it came to a specific, unique French Alsace lace she loved. This lace, meticulously hand-stitched around the cuffs and the collar of the dress on the rack, featured a small, almost invisible, 3-petal flower motif. Evelyn remembered it vividly, not from the wedding dress itself, but from a set of antique napkins Clara had refused to use. A pattern so distinct, so particular to her mother's almost obsessive taste, that it felt like a signature. Evelyn reached out, her fingers trembling, tracing the cold, heavy silk. A label was sewn into the inside, not the typical designer label, but a small, hand-embroidered tag. Clara had always sewn a small tag into every piece of clothing she altered or created for herself. Evelyn turned the dress over, heart pounding against her ribs like a captive bird, and saw it. A small, white tag with the initials CM sewn in a tiny, perfect, sapphire blue cross-stitch. CM, Clara Marie. The world seemed to tilt. The buzzing fluorescent lights of the thrift store became too bright, the surrounding silence too loud. This wasn't just like her mother's dress. This was it. The one that was supposed to be packed away properly. The one that was supposed to be a sacred, untouchable memory. How could her mother's dress, this symbol of a life and marriage, end up here anonymously, in a discount rack, hundreds of miles from where her mother lived, only 6 months after her death? Evelyn gripped the silk, the fabric suddenly feeling less like a piece of cloth and more like a heavy, cold shroud holding a terrible secret. A new, terrifying thought sliced through the shock. Her mother didn't lose this dress. Someone got rid of it. And that meant the seemingly simple, quiet life Clara had lived might have been nothing more than a carefully constructed facade, hiding something vast, cold, and utterly devastating. The true story of Clara Marie, and perhaps the man who left them, was suddenly hanging on a rack in the golden hanger. And Evelyn was only just beginning to pull the thread. Evelyn bought the dress. She didn't haggle, didn't ask questions, she couldn't speak, really. She just pushed the cash across the counter, took the heavy plastic garment bag, and fled the store as if the ghosts of 100 failed marriages were chasing her. Back in her car, parked beneath a mercilessly bright afternoon sun, she pulled the dress onto the passenger seat and just stared. The sight of it was visceral, a physical punch to the gut. The silk was heavy, cool to the touch, and now felt less like a relic and more like an accuser. This was Clara's dress. There was no doubt. The specific, almost archaic stiffness of the fabric, the faint, almost imperceptible scent of lavender and old paper that Clara used to scent her linen closet. Evelyn was already a woman wrestling with grief, and now she was staring at irrefutable evidence that her grief was built on a lie. Why abandon it? Why tell her daughter it was safely tucked away? The questions were relentless, a frantic, swirling storm in her mind. Evelyn drove straight home, the silence in the car amplified by the presence of the dress. Once inside her sterile apartment, she spread the gown out on her bed. It was beautiful, in a stoic, unyielding way, just like her mother. Evelyn ran her hands over the seams, searching, desperately seeking a logical explanation. Maybe Clara had donated it years ago and forgotten? No, Clara never forgot anything. Maybe a mistake at the dry cleaners? Too far-fetched. This was intentional. Someone wanted it gone anonymous, forgotten in the back of a thrift store. The real shift in the story came when Evelyn started to really examine the gown, not as a symbol, but as an object. Clara was a genius with a needle and thread, and she had an old-world habit of creating secret pockets, tiny little tucks and seams where a precious note or a few coins could be hidden. Evelyn remembered her mother telling her once, "A true seamstress knows where to hide a secret, Evelyn. No one ever looks at the hem." And that's exactly where Evelyn looked. Slowly, methodically, she began to trace the almost invisible line of stitching that secured the inner lining to the heavy hem of the silk train. Her fingers, fine and practiced, found a section no more than an inch long, where the stitching was ever so slightly thicker, uneven. A tiny closure, almost imperceptible. Heart hammering again, Evelyn carefully snipped the thread with a tiny pair of embroidery scissors. The silk parted, and tucked inside the space between the lining and the hem, sealed in a small, folded square of wax paper, was a photograph. Not of her mother's wedding day with her father. This was much older, faded to the sepia tones of the mid-1970s. The photo showed Clara, looking impossibly young, her hair long and loose, smiling a smile Evelyn had never seen, radiant, unburdened, utterly joyful. And she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a man. Not Evelyn's father. This man was different, taller, with dark, curling hair that brushed his shoulders, a rugged, open face, and an intensity in his eyes that matched the wild joy in Clara's. They were standing on a wooden dock, the background a shimmering expanse of water, perhaps a large lake or an ocean. But it was the jewelry that made Evelyn gasp. On Clara's left hand, the finger where her wedding ring should have been, was a simple silver band. On the man's hand, the exact same ring. They were wearing matching wedding bands. This wasn't just a fling. This wasn't a casual boyfriend. This was a marriage. Evelyn stared at the image, her mind struggling to reconcile the joyful, carefree Clara in the photo with the rigidly controlled woman who had raised her. Who is this man? When was this? And if this was her mother's first marriage, who was Evelyn's father, the one who had disappeared? Had he been the second husband, marrying a woman who was already concealing a devastating secret? The paranoia tightened its grip. Clara hadn't just lied about the dress. She had lied about the very foundation of her life. Evelyn's father, the man she barely remembered, was now just a vague shadow cast by an unknown, smiling figure in a faded photograph. Evelyn turned the photo over, her hands shaking so violently she almost dropped it. And there, written in Clara's perfect, precise script, were 4 numbers and a location. July 14th, 78. Cabin B3, Lake Lita. The date was years before Evelyn was born, years before Clara married her known father. Cabin B3, Lake Lita. The cryptic clue felt like a breadcrumb tossed into a dark forest. It was an address, a time, a place of profound significance. Why hide it in the hem of a dress she intended to abandon? Was it a confession? A final plea? Or was it a warning? Evelyn leaned back, the photo clutched in her hand. She was now a detective in her own life, tasked with solving the mystery of a mother she realized she never truly knew. The dress wasn't an ending. It was a terrifying, heart-wrenching beginning. The cabin, the date, the man, they all demanded answers. And Evelyn knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she was going to get them. The next morning, Evelyn was on the road. The photo, the date, the location, July 14th, 78. Cabin B3, Lake Lita, were burned into her memory. Lake Lita wasn't far, about a 6-hour drive, a small, isolated resort town nestled in the foothills of Pennsylvania. The road trip was a blur of frenetic energy and mounting dread. Evelyn barely registered the passing landscape. Her focus was entirely internal, replaying every memory of her mother, searching for any inconsistency, any hidden twitch or tell that might have signaled the vast chasm of deception she'd been living over. What if her mother had run away? What if the man in the photo was a criminal? The possibilities were endless and universally terrifying. The placid image of the simple wedding dress was now completely shattered, replaced by the dramatic, high-stakes reality of a hidden identity. Lake Lita itself was a sleepy, anachronistic place, the kind of town that seemed preserved in amber from the 1970s. The resort was a cluster of weather-beaten wooden cabins flanking a murky, expansive lake. Evelyn found the main office, a small, dusty structure with a hand-painted sign, and pulled up. An old man, mid-70s, thin and perpetually squinting, sat behind the counter reading a tattered paperback. This was Silas, the owner. Evelyn approached cautiously, the wedding dress wrapped in its plastic bag in the trunk, the photo tucked safely in her purse. She didn't lead with the truth. "I'm doing some genealogy work," she said, her voice tight. "I'm trying to track down some family members who might have honeymooned here in the late 70s. A couple named Clara and... I'm not sure of the man's name. They stayed in cabin B3. Silas didn't look up immediately. He slowly lowered the book, the action taking an agonizingly long time. His eyes, a pale, watery blue, finally met hers. And for a heart-stopping moment, Evelyn thought she saw a flicker of profound recognition, or perhaps fear. 70s, he murmured, his voice a gravelly whisper. Lot of people came through here in the 70s. Cabins are mostly gone now, structurally unsound. But B3. I remember B3. Evelyn pressed, her palms sweating. The couple. Do you remember them? Clara? Dark hair, maybe late 20s. Silas sighed, a heavy, theatrical sound. Clara. Yeah, she was memorable. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the worn counter, his gaze suddenly sharp. She came here with her husband. Not for a honeymoon. They were hiding. I knew at the moment they stepped out of that beat-up old truck. Evelyn's breath hitched. Hiding. It was worse than she thought. Hiding from what, Silas? Do you remember the man's name? Silas shook his head slowly. He called himself Jim. But his name was probably something else. He was the nervous one. But she, Clara, she was a powerhouse. Fierce. She was protecting something. Or someone. Jim was in trouble, deep trouble. Bad people. He paused, his eyes drifting to the window, lost in a 40-year-old memory. They only stayed a week. Left everything. Clothes, food, like they vanished into thin air. He left me a note. Said to tell anyone who asked that they headed north. But they didn't. They went the other way. South. Fast. Left everything. That explained the abandoned wedding dress. Evelyn took a shaky breath. Did they have anything at all that might have been important? A box? A specific item? Silas looked back at her, his expression hardening. They left a lot of things. But there was one thing. The day they left, Clara gave me an envelope. Said if anyone ever came looking for her, anyone at all, I was to send it to the address on the back. Said if I didn't, they'd find me. I kept my promise, sealed that thing in a safety deposit box down at the bank. Never opened it. Figured it was evidence. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The ultimate tie. Did anyone ever come looking for her, Silas? He narrowed his eyes, a deep, unsettling suspicion finally crossing his features. No, no one ever did. Until you. Who are you? Why are you asking about Clara after all this time? Her husband was a dangerous man, girl. You stirring up old ghosts. Ghosts that might not be ready to rest. Evelyn swallowed, the lie catching in her throat. She decided to tell him a partial truth, a version that might finally unlock the vault. Silas, I'm Evelyn. I'm Clara's daughter. And I think this man, Jim, was my real father. The look on Silas's face was not one of shock, but of profound, terrible sorrow. He confirmed her worst fears. He nodded, once, slowly. He was honey. And that's the tragedy of it. He was a good man, caught up in the wrong thing. He told Clara to leave. To start fresh, marry someone safe, and never look back. He made her promise to save their child. And she did. She had to break her own heart to save yours. Silas finally agreed to help. The old envelope was waiting for them at the bank. But as they were leaving, Evelyn noticed a small, almost imperceptible detail. On Silas's forearm, hidden beneath the cuff of his threadbare flannel shirt, was a faded tattoo. 2 interlocking silver rings. The exact design on the wedding bands in the photograph. Silas wasn't just an innkeeper. He was an accomplice. He was the one who helped Clara escape. And that envelope, it wasn't just a letter. It was likely the full, final confession of her mother's desperate, dangerous past. The truth was within reach, but the price of knowing felt overwhelmingly high. The trip to the bank with Silas felt like walking into the final act of a slow-burning thriller. The silence in the car was thick, heavy with the weight of 40 years of lies and sacrifices. Silas finally broke it, his voice barely a rasp. That tattoo, Evelyn. It wasn't just a symbol for them. Jim and I were cousins. Best friends. He didn't just ask me to hide an envelope. He asked me to make sure she went. I bought her the ticket. I watched her drive away, pregnant and alone, to a new life, a new name. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Clara hadn't just been protecting a secret. She'd been executing a desperate, coordinated escape plan, orchestrated by the man she truly loved. At the bank, the envelope was retrieved from the safety deposit box. It was thick, heavier than a single letter, and sealed with a simple, almost regal wax seal. Evelyn's hands shook as she finally held it. This was the ultimate truth from her mother, the one she couldn't speak in life. Back in the car, parked by the murky edge of Lake Leda, Evelyn broke the seal. Inside, there wasn't a confession of crime, but a thick stack of pages, meticulously written, and 2 other items. The first was a birth certificate, official and stamped, showing the birth of Evelyn Marie 3 months before the date on her official birth certificate, with her father listed as James Michael, the man in the photo. Her mother had literally invented a new birthday, a new history, to protect her. The second item was a newspaper clipping, yellowed and fragile, dated 1 week after Clara left Lake Leda. The headline screamed, "Witness vanishes, key figure in syndicate case feared dead." The small article detailed the disappearance of James Michael, a man who had been caught up in a massive, brutal organized crime syndicate and was slated to testify against them. His sudden disappearance was treated as an execution. He hadn't left Clara. He had disappeared himself for her and the baby's safety. He had bought her a second life at the cost of his own. The stack of pages was Clara's final letter, her true story. She wrote about her passionate, brief marriage to James, a man who unknowingly fell in with dangerous people, and how, when he realized the danger, he made the ultimate sacrifice. He staged his own death and made Clara promise to find a new, stable, boring life, a life safe from the syndicate's long reach. He told her to find a kind, simple man, give his daughter a new history, and never look back. The wedding dress, her only real relic of James, had to be abandoned for the sake of the story. She couldn't risk it being found, a link to the life they had shared. Years later, when she was packing before her illness, she had meant to destroy it, but couldn't bring herself to burn the last physical memory of James. Instead, she sealed the truth in the hem, donated it miles away, a final, desperate act of preservation, hoping someone, perhaps even Evelyn, would one day find the truth. Tears streamed down Evelyn's face, not of sorrow, but of fierce, complex understanding. The cold, distant mother she knew wasn't unloving. She was a traumatized survivor, a hero who had spent her entire life playing a role, sacrificing her own heart for her daughter's safety. The seemingly empty, sterile life had been a fortress, built to keep the darkness out. Evelyn looked out over Lake Leda, the murky water now seeming to hold a profound, quiet beauty. The mystery wasn't a betrayal, it was the deepest act of maternal love imaginable. The wedding dress, once a symbol of a lie, was now the holy relic of a heartbreaking, epic love story. Evelyn closed the car door, the setting sun casting long, orange shadows across the water. She knew now why her mother had always been so distant. She couldn't let the real Clara, the passionate, brave woman who married Jim, ever show. That woman was a danger. The woman who raised Evelyn was a saint of silence. Evelyn took one last look at Silas, a silent understanding passing between them, two people who now shared the weight of Clara's incredible secret. She drove away from Lake Leda, not with the bitterness of the abandoned, but with the profound, devastating legacy of the loved. She had found her mother's dress, and in the hem, she had finally found her mother. And that, viewers of Forgotten Ties, is where we have to leave Evelyn's journey for now. It's a raw, emotional truth, isn't it? The quietest lives often hold the most violent secrets. If this story of sacrifice, deception, and a mother's fierce love resonated with you, if it made your heart ache just a little bit, then please, don't forget to like this video. Subscribe to Forgotten Ties so you don't miss any of the deeper, darker truths we uncover. And definitely hit that notification bell because believe me, you do not want to miss what we're digging into next. Until then, stay curious and remember, sometimes the things we lose are the only things that truly save us.